This time on Ask Christian Counseling Associates, we sit down with special guest Gary Petrie and step into a real-life journey of parenting a child with ADHD. Hear honest struggles, surprising breakthroughs, and the hope that grows through challenge. Join us as we enter into a space for encouragement, insight, and connection. Welcome to the podcast, Gary.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
It's great to have you on the program. And just for full disclosure for the folks, you're the producer of our podcast.
Yes, I am. Going on 3.5, 4 years or something like that. It's been a while.
Yeah. So I don't know how many of these we've done now, like around 50.
No, I think it might be a little over 50, close to 55.
Yeah. So you see a lot of topics, come through here, things that we talk about. And we've been talking about ADHD this year. Of course, this is always something that comes across, people have questions about.
Yeah.
And what I really thought would be a positive thing is just for people to hear a parent's experience. And we actually did one of our ADHD tests on you.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that and see how you feel about it. And so, why don't we just sort of delving into that, let's jump into how does this all matter to you?
Well, it matters to me because all three of my children were diagnosed with ADHD.
All three?
All three.
Did that surprise you, to say like, wow, and how did that come about, I guess?
It all came about is that when my daughter was young, she was having some learning disabilities. She had to take speech, and she had to take some other classes.
How young was she when this was discovered?
When this was discovered, I believe that it was actually when she was in preschool, so it was pretty early.
And your daughter, she's the oldest of the three?
Yeah, she's the oldest of the three, and I got two stepchildren as well.
Is he so like around preschool?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
you started to notice things were
but I think that once she got into kindergarten and probably around first grade, like she wasn't diagnosed with ADHD at that time. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until she was like in maybe, I want to say around second grade, that it was a real problem. Like she would do things that other kids wouldn't be doing. Okay. Mm-hmm. She would be sitting in class picking at her skin, or she would be, doing stuff with her pencil and stuff like that. So it wasn't like she was paying attention in class.
Okay.
And, of course the teacher came up to us and said, "We believe your child might have ADHD." And I think at that time it was just ADD. I think, I'm not quite sure if the technical term was ADHD at that point.
Okay, so they were using different kinds of terms.
Yeah, they were using different attention deficit disorder. That's what it was.
For me, and just the time that I've been in the field, so I can't. Yeah. But we used to operate under the DSM-4, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, 4th edition, and now it's in the 5th edition, and that was what you were supposed to follow, how you were supposed to label and term things, and it was always attention deficit hyperactivity disorder since I've been around. Except that people would use the term ADD. Yeah. Especially when they were, in my mind, saying that they were an adult and had some kind of problem. But people would always use those interchangeably. Well, it was confusing for people.
Well, it was confusing, and to be with Brooke and to be around her.
Brooke's your oldest daughter.
Yeah. Okay. Biological oldest daughter. She was never hyperactive.
Okay.
So to look at it and say ADHD, hyperactive, what, that wasn't Brooke. She was never at that point.
In the classification, there's 3 major classifications that allow us to say that this is a pattern that would be termed ADHD.
Yeah.
And that's hyperactivity, impulsivity, and inattention.
Yeah.
So hyperactivity, especially in children, is like, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
And that would be like the classic, this person is ADHD.
Yeah.
Now you're saying with Brooke, it wasn't really that way.
No, it wasn't. I would think that she was a pretty normal child, but when it came to learning, she definitely had difficulties. Now, it's kind of like twofold here.
And that would be more of like the inattention.
Yeah, but it was kind of like a twofold because Brooke's birthday's on August 19th. So any child born before the August 1st had to wait another year in order to go to school or something like that, or it was August 30th. Okay. I can't quite remember the date.
So she was young for her grade.
She was almost a year younger than everybody else.
Okay.
Okay. And I remember the doctor telling us that it might actually do her good because she would be learning from kids that are more mature than she is. And it might lift her up, okay, to do better at school. And this was her from preschool going into, believe it or not, that young, to going into first grade. But again, at this point, she wasn't diagnosed with ADHD. She just had some learning disabilities that we knew about.
Right. And so there were some factors that we can always say, this made a difference. She was young in her group of kids, and so maybe there's maturity. She's getting compared to kids who have a higher level of maturity. They're like a year ahead.
Yeah.
And, hey, that could have made a difference. I think we should sort of get at that a little bit, but before we do, what were the other things that got the teachers looking into her? She was behind the other kids in her, what she was learning.
Well, this would be in probably first or second grade. Okay. She wasn't focusing.
Okay. And she wasn't focused.
Yeah, and teachers would have to constantly, Brooke, listen, look at me, And what happened is we ended up going to the doctors, okay, in first, second grade. I can't quite remember the grade. I think it actually might have been second grade. And they actually sent something home with us. It was that we needed to fill out, okay? And we needed to give the same exact paper to the teacher so they can fill out. So with what the doctor got back was the information that we filled out and the information the teacher filled out, and they made an intelligent decision she has ADHD, or I think at the time it was ADD. Like I said, they gave it different things. So that's how we got about, doing something about it. And one of the things that we did is put her on the medicine that the doctor told us about.
Yeah. So, when we want to observe a child, and it's typical that, okay, we're in the office and a parent's coming in, I have a concern, the teacher said that there's ADHD, there are problems in learning, there's other problems. What we do is go through an observation across different environments. And what we use it's called a behavior assessment system for children, or a BASC. And nowadays you can just email that out to everybody, but it sounds like the doctor was using that, because you're supposed to survey the parent, the teachers. If they're in some other kind of environment where they're observed by an adult, you can go across all of those. and the survey will start to, from their observation, identify problems.
Yeah.
And so it sounds like you filled out this assessment form, you brought it back to the doc, and the doctor then says what?
We need to put her on medicine. We recommend her going on medicine so that way she can become more focused and bring her grades up at school.
Okay.
So we went with the doctor's advice, and the first medicine.
How'd you feel about the doc? Saying that? Yeah.
Well, I think right away the first thing that comes through your mind, and as a parent, my child's broken. Okay, there's something wrong with my child, because she's not, like the other children. She's different. Okay,
yeah.
not in a real bad way, but she's just, she's having problems where the other kids aren't.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the first thing that goes through your mind. But after.
Now you say that calmly. I can imagine for some parents that would be like a freak out.
It was a little bit, because we're giving our child a medicine. We're not talking about an aspirin, okay? Mm-hmm. We're talking about Ritalin, and that's what they put her on.
Mm-hmm.
And after my experience, and unfortunately I know that some people swear by the medicine, I wasn't happy with it because it changed my child.
Mm-hmm.
It made her more focused, but it kind of took her fun side away, you know? The other thing these are side effects. And the other thing is that she lost an exorbitant amount of weight because it suppresses the appetite. That I definitely didn't like. She wouldn't eat.
So she begins the medication. You see changes, both positive and negative, but some of the negative changes that you see is she's not eating.
Yeah.
She's losing a lot of weight.
Yeah, by the time she was in like third grade, she was like, maybe, and they don't weigh that much to begin with. So she was like 20 pounds underweight.
Wow.
She was skin and bones.
Yeah, for a child at third grade to be 20 pounds underweight.
She was very skinny.
And so she went from being normal, like normal range, to being 20 pounds underweight.
Well, we took her off the medicine.
At that point.
Oh, yeah, we're like, you can't be on this.
So she was on medication from second grade to third grade, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and beyond, she was taken off that medicine. And
then put on another. Okay.
Put on Adderall.
Okay.
And it was better. I can tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these medicines work different for a number of kids. And Adderall was definitely better for her.
Mm-hmm.
She started eating again. She became pretty much normalized with her weight. But as far as attention deficit for Brooke, I don't think it worked as well. But Brooke had her own ways of dealing with this, which I was surprised.
Mm-hmm.
And she would, like, if she took had to study for a test or something. So by the time she was in fourth grade, I learned this from her, that sometimes she would actually sing the test to music in her head to kind of deal with it. And I don't know if that's normal for a child with ADHD.
Sing the test to music.
Yeah, she would like have a song in her head, and she would remember the words or whatever the test was. It could be a math test, and she would sing along to music in her head. She would make up a song.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of different things. I wouldn't attribute that to her pattern of problems as much as that's a nice way to remember stuff.
Well,
when you're having trouble remembering.
By the time she got into fourth grade,
mm-hmm.
and I don't know if I ever told you this, because we know each other pretty well.
Right.
They had on Pi Day, you know what Pi Day is? It's like the circumference of a circle to its
Yeah, it's
diameter or something like that.
What is pi? Is it 3.14 or something like that?
And a bunch of
numbers
that go on forever. It's infinite. Okay.
Sure.
Well, they always, every year in 4th grade, they went to Center Avenue in Butler. And every year they have a contest on Pi Day. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the day before, they hand out a sheet of paper, and it has like the entire sheet of paper, 10-point numbers, all the way from the top to the bottom. There could be like 300 numbers on there. Okay. A pi. Like 314 or whatever point, and it goes on for like 300 numbers.
Sure.
And they tell the kids, take this home, study it. Tomorrow we're going to have a contest who can remember the most numbers in a row.
Yeah.
Okay. A normal child, I mean, I have a hard time remembering my own phone number, a phone number, not my own, but a phone number. Mm-hmm. Most kids, would remember maybe 15, 18 numbers. An exceptional kid might remember like 30 numbers in a row in one day. That's a lot of numbers. Brooke, they would have to stand up in the class at their seat and look at the teacher and say the numbers. She remembered she remembered 81 numbers in a row.
Singing a song.
I guess. I don't know, but 81 numbers.
That's a lot of numbers to remember.
In a row. I mean, it's random. I mean, they're not random, but
random number. Yeah.
But there's no like system to the numbers. I mean, they're just all over the place.
Yeah, she must have developed some way of remembering that.
Yeah, so that was, I forget.
You were impressed. What grade was that? Like
really,
4th grade?
4th grade. And I remember going to my sisters bragging about it. Oh, Brooke remembered 81 numbers in a row. Can you believe that? Yeah. And I remember my brother-in-law brings up a computer keyboard from his office because he wanted to test Brooke's memory. Okay? Mm-hmm. And he puts the keyboard down in front of her and lets her study all the keys on the keyboard, okay, going across, and gave it to her for like 10 or 15 minutes. Try to remember as many numbers as you can. Mm-hmm. And symbols, there are symbols, numbers, letters, whatever, on a keyboard. And again, they're not in ABCD, in alphabetical order. And so she did that for like 10 minutes, took it away, waited a half hour. Okay, has the keyboard. She's not looking at it and says, I want you to remember, tell me back the keys or whatever. She repeated every one on the keyboard.
So what did this mean?
I don't know.
She had some...
I don't know if that was
definable, like, everything wasn't all...
I mean, I don't know how much...
Now, she's still on Adderall at this point.
No, she's no longer on anything. No, by the time...
Now, tell me about that. Like, she's in 4th grade now. She's showing you these abilities of, high memory, high retention. And she's off the medication by 4th grade. How come?
Well, no, she's off the medicine by the time... I would say we took her off the medicine probably when she was in 6th or 7th grade. I can't quite remember what grade it was.
Okay.
And I think what it was is that we would go at times without giving her the medicine, and it seemed not to affect her learning. I think what happens is that even myself, like I had a hard time in school. I went to, Laughlin Center when I was little because I too had speech issues and learning disability. But by the time I got in 8th grade, it seems like everything clicked for me. And like when it came to math, beyond 8th grade, I didn't even open up a math book. And I would get A's.
You just knew it.
I just knew it. It was like, boom, like a light bulb went off in my head.
But until 8th grade,
and I could tell
pretty
that,
much.
Yeah, and I could tell that with Brooke. Okay? So now, granted, I still think she has ADHD. There's no doubt in my mind. Because some of the things that she does, like that's kind of from my own research, like she talks really loud, even like if you're 2 feet from her. It's like, you don't have to talk so loud. I'm right here, you know. And then I find out that people who have ADHD usually talk louder than people that don't.
Yeah, what would happen if you were to say, like, hey, Brooke, you're really sometimes, like, in these social situations, just talking way above everybody else. It sort of sticks out, and it creates this kind of tension where you're really not showing up as well as you could. Hey, let's try to work on that. You know, like, I'd help you, you know, coach you along a little bit, and let's see if you can get a handle on that.
Yeah, I mean, we tried.
And what
I would say
ultimately
use your quiet voice. Like, I can honestly say I've never heard her whisper. You know how, like, you're in a situation you might have to.
Well, how old is she now? She's married, and, like, let's fast forward up till now.
Yeah, she's 26.
Yeah.
So she, you know, she's married to a wonderful guy.
She's married. She's working full time.
She's working full time. She's a chef.
Living in the family life. She's a chef.
Yeah, and she's
she talking loud?
Still talking loud.
I'll see. Like, I mean, just for the little I know Brooke, and I see her in church. I have conversations when we're over in the house. Yeah, like, I don't notice that as much, maybe, but maybe I'm not looking so closely.
No, maybe not. I don't know, but
I wouldn't be like, wow, like, she's, man, you know. Although, yeah, maybe, like, if we really started to look, we'd say, like, yeah, there's probably some things that are different.
But I think also, like, these medicines, you know, made her focus, but they really do kind of, like, if you have a child with a very funny personality and just goofy, be prepared that it might take that away.
Is that what you noticed, Brooke?
Yeah, that's what I noticed. And
that was at the end of the medication when you noticed those changes?
Yeah, I think it was like, you know, let's give it a try without the medication, because the last thing I wanted to do was continue feeding my child any type of medication, you know. Now, I'm not saying it wasn't safe. I mean, clearly the Adderall was much better than the Ritalin. Okay, in my opinion. But it also, you know, it's no medicine. Just like ibuprofen or Tylenol, you don't want to take too much of that.
Yeah.
And to take that on a daily basis is probably not good for your body.
Well, I think one of the objections here, and this, folks, is not a podcast about all the different kind of ADHD medications now. You know, things have progressed since Ritalin and Adderall, which were really popular in the 90s, the time that this was going on. And now you have other iterations of that are being used. And again, that'll be a future podcast, you know, just to get into all of that. But this is something I hear parents talk about a lot, is that the medication alters the person, and there's sacrifices that you have to make. Like, all of that creative stuff that was there with her was dampened. Yeah. Or just changed.
Yeah, she's a very creative, you know, person.
And knowing Brooke, like, she's a chef that makes these creations, you know, all this different kinds of things that chefs have to do. It's like it's an art form.
Yeah,
really.
Well, she's also, believe it or not, I mean, she had problems with speech, but she's a writer.
I know, she's right. She wrote a book or something, and she's written her first book. And she has an interest in that.
She hasn't published it yet, but it's like 400 pages.
It's a complete work.
It's a book. I mean, it's a big book. I mean, it takes you.
Yeah, and to let the audience know about Gary, you know, Gary does all the artwork for multiple companies. You know, he does that for websites that he creates. He's a graphic designer, as well as a photographer, as well as just everything
pretty
creative that goes into advertising. And that's what you've done your whole career. It's all creative artwork.
35 years I've been doing this professionally. So
that's something that goes on in your family. That's something that is appreciated. You can definitely make a career out of it. It's just the way some people are. Yeah. And that you saw in Brooke as well as yourself. And strangely, the medication changes that.
Yeah, it does. And now I was never, you know, myself was never diagnosed with anything, and I could have just
we're going to deal with that today, right? So.
Christian Counseling Associates is ready to serve you, providing a wide range of counseling services. Christian counseling is accessible to everyone. We serve both Christians who want their faith integrated into the counseling process, or those holding any beliefs or attitudes towards spirituality. With many years of counseling experience, our counselors are professional, licensed, highly trained, and rooted in their commitment to their church and communities. CCA is able to provide a full range of clinical counseling services. For more information, visit our website at www.ccawpa.com.
So more of the story, your two sons who are coming up, what's going on with them?
My son, Alex, was also diagnosed with ADHD.
And how does that happen for him?
Same thing. That take papers to doctors, take paper to teacher.
So it's noticed in the school. He's having trouble with
schoolwork. He's a couple years younger than Brooks. So he's like his next birthday, which is actually this month. He'll be 24. Okay. Mm-hmm. Same thing, except with Alex, I think we didn't put him on Ritalin because we knew the problems that we had with Brooke. So he was put directly on Adderall. But with Alex and Daniel, which is unusual, I don't know why, my mom had migraines. Well, Alex and Daniel both suffer from migraines. Okay. So Alex was on this medicine, and now we only had it on him. He took this medicine.
He was on medicine for migraines.
Yeah, no, he was on this for ADHD.
Okay, and when does that start? What grade?
I would say that started probably around 3rd or 4th grade. So it was a little later than Brooke, but he was having, problems.
Problems in school. And that was identified by a teacher, and then you go through the same process.
Yes, went through the same process. Now, I do not remember whether or not he wasn't paying attention. I don't think it was that. It was just he was getting bad grades.
When you say bad, like CDF?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I would say that. I can't quite remember. I mean, this is a while ago. But I'm pretty sure it was to his, because I don't remember him ever, not paying attention in class.
Yeah. Now with Brooke, you said that she was a year ahead, and maturity could have been a factor. Any factors going on with Alex that we could also say could have played a role in him getting bad grades?
No,
nothing.
But he was also though in speech classes.
He had delayed speech.
He had a learning disability, had delayed speech. So he was in those classes too, where you have to be taken out of normal class for a couple hours a day and go to this, special place that you would
like special classes.
Special classes, and for a kid that can be traumatizing.
So he was identified by the school, and that was going on too.
But he only took the medicine for a year. We didn't keep him on for a long time because it was affecting his migraines.
Okay, so
it would actually trigger his migraines. And I mean, he takes this medicine, and before we took him off of it, which was it only lasted a couple months, because it just, anytime it seems like to me, and I'm not a doctor, but anytime you take medicine, it accumulates over, builds up over time. Yeah. He was at the point where he's having 3 migraines a week, and that's ridiculous. And when he had migraines, he got sick. And he still gets migraines today, and he still gets sick, but he might have a migraine once every 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
But he was having 3 a week, and we'd have to go to school and pick him up. And I
because they're incapacitating, you can't do anything.
And I just said, that's it. I'm not going to keep him on this medicine. I don't want him to take any medicine.
I remember I was in 8th grade maybe, and there was a guy who he had a migraine in class, and he got up and he was so disoriented that he like urinated in the hallway, like he thought he was in the bathroom. It was terrible. Like
no, it was never that bad, but he would get sick.
It could completely knock you out, So, so that would not be worth it to have on medication if it was increasing, and yeah.
And then, it's just that, first of all my kids, by the time they got in high school, none of them were on any type of medicine. Yeah. And other than Brooke in 10th grade, because she just had a really bad year because she lost her mom.
In 10th grade.
In 10th grade.
What year was that for Alex? When he would have
he would have been in 8th grade.
8th grade.
And so that was a tough year, but it affected her grades because she just couldn't focus.
Well, how long? Your wife had passed away. Her name was Joni. How long was she sick for?
About close to 5 years.
Okay.
She had breast cancer.
Okay, so that happened.
She passed away in the day after Mother's Day in 2013. So the kids got to see their mom for Mother's Day. She was in hospice.
Okay.
But that was a tough year for the kids. And especially Brooke, the only daughter at that time in the family. It affected her and it showed up in her grades.
Sure. And, I guess that I would say that was sort of going on during this time.
Yes. Yeah.
In the background,
we're
focused on, there's these symptoms of schoolwork problems. Their mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, and all of that time people were dealing with the fact that she was sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And for Alex, that would have put him back in like 3rd grade when the onset of that.
I remember probably close to the same time. So that might have been, a reason.
Did anybody look at that and say, wow, your kids could have a lot of anxiety right now about the figural person in their life being possibly terminally
it's hard.
sick?
It's unless you're seeing a counselor, it's hard to look at any other factors. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And like Daniel at the time when she first was diagnosed, Daniel was 2.
Yeah. So he was growing up in the reality that there was a terminal illness with his mother.
He never knew a mom that wasn't sick.
Okay.
He doesn't have that recollection because when she passed, he was 7. He had just turned 7. So he turned 7 in January, and then by May, she had passed away.
Okay. So
he has very little recollection of his mom.
Okay.
And that's, I can understand that because, I lost a brother at 18. He was 18 and I was 8. And so to look back, I don't remember my brother Kenny a whole lot.
Yeah, like looking now.
I mean, I remember moments, but I don't remember
we're around the same age, but thinking back to 7.
7.
You don't have a ton of memories.
No.
But you do remember what life was like, and what your family was like, and things that happened. So, say for instance, I think about 7th grade would have been 6th and 7th grade would have been kindergarten, right? Or 6 and 7 years old, I should say.
Yeah.
Would have been kindergarten.
Yeah.
I can remember my best friend coming up to me in kindergarten. I can remember the teacher.
I actually think he was in 2nd grade when she passed, so he was 7.
But to give context, my parents were divorced when I was in 1st or 2nd grade, and I can remember how all of that felt. In fact, if I think about it, I can get a sense about what that was like.
But the main thing is for home, because we knew, we could have sat there. I mean, she pretty much had terminal. She had a very aggressive form of breast cancer. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to make things normal for our kids. We didn't want we were trying not to have them like freak out.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we went to Disney. We did everything that, we could to have a fun life with the kids. And, and Joni was a strong woman. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And so I think that, it might have affected Alex during those years. And maybe that's part of the reason why he was having issues in school. And I'm sure it was.
It could have been distracting.
Yeah. But I mean, by the time all my kids got in high school, other than Brooke being in 10th grade, they graduated with practically straight A's, which is like, and they weren't on medicine, okay? Because Daniel, which is the youngest, and he's 19 now, he was diagnosed with ADHD, and this is the thing that I think's funny. Of all the kids, I don't think he's probably the one that I would, we went to the doctors, hey, he's having problems in school. Well, he has ADHD. There was no paper to send home. There was no, like, diagnostic done or any type of testing done or anything like that. It was just like, well, he has ADHD.
Who said that, the teachers or?
No, doctor.
The doctor.
Oh, yeah, it was like, just. So
this was.
And here's a script.
The family physician.
Yeah, here's a script. Get a medicine. I'm not even sure if this was when I lived here in Latrobe, well after Joni had passed. And I'm not even sure if I put him on medicine. And if I did, it was for a month. It wasn't like any extended period of time. I'm like, you know what? If he brings home C's and D's, that's still passing. Okay, I'm fine with that. Mm-hmm. The other kids did very well once they got in high school. And I hate to say it, but those are the grades that matter. Those are the grades that get you off to college, and that's your GPA and everything. Mm-hmm. And he literally he did well.
Yeah. So if you were to look back on all these experiences, the 3 kids now adults being diagnosed with ADHD, all 3 prescribed medication, and by the time that they're done with high school, there's any problem that is there is manageable.
Yeah,
and they graduate successfully. Yeah, no medication. Yeah, despite diagnosis.
Well, Daniel, he just had A and B's from 9th to 12th grade. He had 1 C.
Yeah, which is good.
He graduated with like a GPA of like close to a 3.6 or something like that. So he did very well. Yeah, and the same with the other kids. I mean, unfortunately, Brooke's GPA was hurt a little bit because of that 10th grade year. And I feel bad for her. I mean, it was still like a 3.2 something, but it was like it would have been way higher if it wasn't for 10th grade.
Sure. And with the medication, any particulars about Alex and Daniel, like what they experienced, positive or negative?
After going through with Brooke everything, and then going through Alex and Daniel, I'm not even sure if they had ADHD. I because it's just knowing my kids.
Well, with Daniel, there was no test.
There was no test, nothing.
Anything.
And I'm like, well, he's not hyperactive. Well, he might not be physically hyperactive, but he's hyperactive in the brain. And I'm not, I'm like, his mind's just going 100 mile an hour and he can't stop it. That's kind of what was explained to me.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not, like I said, I'm not a doctor or anything, but it's just, sometimes I wonder if doctors are doctors either, but
I wonder about the doctor.
Yeah, I'm like, I just, it's not something that should be taken lightly, and I do like the fact that Brooke and Alex were both given tests, and the teachers were given, or not tests, but
they were
papers to fill out, observed, and teachers had to fill out information. I had to fill out information, but I can't actually, I think Brooke was young going into her schooling, and Alex was, of course, dealing with some of the issues at home with his mom being sick. So, I mean, that could have had, like you said, that could have had an effect. And that's something that we really never thought about back then. Like, it wasn't like, you don't think, oh, this is affecting kids, because kids they're not as verbal. That, they don't, Dad, I'm having this issue and I think it might be about Mom, and none of that. And the thing is, and I can honestly say, when Joni passed, the one that took it the hardest was Alex. Mm-hmm. He's the one that was like, it took it really, really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, and he was at the age where he was keenly aware of everything that was going on.
Yeah, he was
and
12.
Maybe most dependent on his parents.
He was 12 when she passed away. Brooke was 15.
Yeah. Yeah, so, wow, like that should have been something that would have been a consideration with the doctors to see if this person was distracted. You doubt the diagnosis of Alex and Daniel.
Yeah. Well, Daniel,
he was a very good student.
Yeah, he was a good student. It's just,
and
the only reason why I even approached the doctor at that time is because both Brooke and Alex were diagnosed.
Yeah,
so if Daniel was having a hard time in one of his classes at a young age, and it's like, could he have ADHD? Oh, yeah, sure. It was like, wait a minute. There's no papers to take home. There's no test to take. It was just, his siblings had it. He must have it. But again, like, just knowing Alex and Daniel, I just don't think they did.
Yeah, so I would classify you as a parent who had a lot of doubts about this whole ADHD thing, especially with two of the kids. And then one, you say, like, yeah, she had ADHD, but you had doubts about what the medication was doing.
Yes. Yeah, I'm not, there's not a, like, fix-all, and medicines, when they affect the brain like ADHD does and makes you focused and stuff like that, there's also other consequences to that. With Brooke, it was, eating disorder, not a disorder, but the fact that she just wouldn't eat, it suppressed her appetite.
It changed the way that she functioned.
Yeah, with Alex, it was migraines, and Daniel suffered migraines, and I didn't want a repeat occurrence.
So the time you get to him, you're saying this is not the first thing that we should go to, or maybe not even a last resort, considering the side effects.
I mean, and I can live with C's, I can live with D's.
And so, folks, we sort of disguise the identity of stories that we tell here, unless it's being volunteered by somebody like Gary. But I'd want the audience to know that through my supervision, I've witnessed, probably thousands of case scenarios over the years that I've been working as a counselor and as a supervisor. And we have seen all kinds of scenarios. And so this would be a very realistic one where we had a young boy who was diagnosed with ADHD. It was coming from the teachers. And we went out to assess the situation. And we really had to take pause because, everybody was worried about him in that he would sit in this dark room and play video games all day and really refuse to do anything else. Like, he was just like sort of locked in his room after he'd come home from school, wasn't getting along with kids so well, so he was like very like socially awkward, and had no interest, of course, in the schoolwork. And so the teachers were beside themselves, like, this kid's out of control. He has ADHD. And back then everything was observations. You would send out checklists like you're talking about. And we'd say, like, he doesn't have any interest in this. He's inattentive. And, when you try to sit him down, he's like, can't sit in his seat. He's hyperactive. And, He blurts out all kinds of things. He's impulsive. He says things he shouldn't say. And, so we started he was on a significant dose of medication.
Yeah.
And, again, sort of shut up in his room. And so the counselors would go out to the house, and we found out that, after like 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks of saying like, hey, what's wrong? Like, it seems like something is bothering you. And that's just, it's not that simple, but we have like various ways of just probing to say, is there something bothering you? And one day he admits that his mother, he doesn't have a father in the home, first of all. So that's we don't know what happened to him. The mother is an exotic dancer, and all his friends know it. And he imagines what that's like. And talking about that, he says, that's why I want to sit in my room. And, it would make sense that when reality is that tough to deal with, it would be great to sit in the room, shut off all the lights, and be in a fantasy world, totally disconnected with having to face school every day. And you would be angry. You would be blurting things out. You would want to sort of get away, get up out of your seat. That would affect you. But nobody knew, and nobody was told before he was like 2 years down the road on this treatment. And they were giving him like higher and higher doses of what was then Ritalin. And he was, by observation that we were looking at, he was like zonked out on it.
Yeah. Well, well, and again, like with Alex, like Brooke, he became more timid because Alex is a goofball. I don't, if you're ever around Alex, he goofs around a lot, and he's a jokester, and I remember being at my brother's and somebody's like, "Oh, you're a good-looking kid," and I said, "Well, he gets his good looks from his dad," because I was in the room, and he looks around, and he says, "Who's my dad?" So I was like, "Hey, wait a minute, Alex."
Your kids are all, they're all creative. They're all, sort of like have a lot of what's like you.
Yeah, Alex is in the music. He loves music. He plays like 7 instruments.
Yeah.
Daniel's follows in his dad's footsteps, and he's a graphic designer. He's going to school for that, and he's a graphic designer for Level 1 Graphics in Latrobe. Yeah. So he's their head designer. So it's like, he's 19. So he's paving himself a pretty good path. The same with the other two.
Yeah. So there was this recent study, and I don't know if I can find it, and I'll try real quick, but I don't want to get rid of our measurement here, but the study would say that ADHD now has a high rate of diagnosis because they changed the way that they were diagnosing the overall issue. Like just before, at least, say for instance, before all this gets started, and so the statistic here that I'm looking for is the first edition of the DSM contained 102 diagnoses. Today, the DSM-5 has 298. We've come up with a tripling almost of the descriptions of things that are wrong with people. And, when it comes to the criteria of ADHD, the prevalence of that, according to a meta-analysis of childhood problems and how they are formally diagnosed in counseling centers and doctors' offices like they were for you, it went from ADHD diagnoses went from 6% in 1998 to 10% by 2018. And we featured this in an article.
Yeah.
But if 1 out of every 10 children have ADHD, doesn't that make it normal? I mean, it makes it, like an exceptional part of normal. Just like if only 10% of people got A's in school, that'd be like, hey, different. But it's not that. At what point do we say that it's in the normal part of the spectrum and not something that's abnormal? Because if it was abnormal, then we say it's it's disordered. It's and that's one of the things that we see is that, there's just a very high prevalence of us saying that this is ADHD.
Yeah.
And we're coming up with less diagnoses like, wow, there's a significant, disruption in the family, or a tragedy, a crisis, or something that is just very hard to face. And, to me...
Well, I definitely believe that could be, with kids that are diagnosed, especially, mine, that there could be another underlying reason why they're not doing well in school.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So, and we always use that as what's their grades like? Well, what's going on? Why is their grades lower? We have the perfect home life. It can't be us, and that's,
Yeah. Well, and definitely, I'm just throwing out there the issue of how high of a percentage does this have to get before we look at it and say, hey, this is something we have to deal with. Mm-hmm. And we're getting to a place in our culture where every challenge that we have in life has a medication.
Yeah.
So it leads us to the next. You said that the medication changed the person. We frequently have seen that. And the point that I would bring up is that the medication is helpful. It helps you focus.
Oh, it does help. There's no doubt about it. And I think that's why, you always hear the stories of college kids, just how they get, this medication, that they take it to do better on tests.
Right.
So it's like.
So we drink coffee. I enjoy coffee. It helps me focus.
Yeah.
And, we're getting to this place in our society of, well, maybe this should be available to us. Maybe it's not a bad thing. And, so we've seen a prevalence of many adults, especially like maybe in our age bracket, where memory is starting to fade.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of other,
where you walk into a room and you don't know what you went into the room for.
Executive functioning just naturally is going to be in decline.
Yeah.
It's a tough thing to deal with. And you want to compete with the 30-somethings?
Uh-huh.
We have something for that. And, so those are a couple of big issues around how do we really, face this kind of issue? And I think that there probably would be an argument out there for adults to say, well, it's legal. You can go to the doctor and get that. It's just that, where does it end? Because if you're going to take medication to be better than me, then I get to take it too. And now we're all on it.
Yeah.
And we're back to square one. We all have the advantage.
Well, it's kind of like having the upper hand, like sports, they take different, things to.
If we're all taking steroids.
Yeah. It's just a stimulant to
maybe
be a better performer.
Yeah. Maybe we could make the argument, maybe we should just either all be on it or all be off it.
Yeah.
Isn't that fair? Instead of.
Well, and as a parent, you want your kids to do well in school.
Yeah.
But there's definitely a fine line between what's best for their schoolwork, or what's better for school, or what's better for them.
Sure.
And it's like we just wanted what's best for them.
Yeah. And so it's like, in that sense, there's this argument. I know I'm getting in trouble with people who really say, like, I have ADHD.
Oh, yeah. And there's definitely people that have different severities of it. And some people, the medicine really, really helps.
Yeah. And they would say, you're sort of explaining away the whole of this. And so I'm sensitive to that.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have to take into consideration parent stories like your own, where they're being told by authorities, the doctor, the teacher, and for some parents, it's very hard to stand up against, or maybe this is a single parent who really, they're saying you have to do something, and at the same time, they're noticing these side effects and they're stuck.
Yeah,
and it's almost like if we just say this is, the kid was born this way, and this is a biological thing that you need to medicate, they're really jammed.
Well, knowing you and many years I have, and your counseling background and that, I've heard you many times go, you have to get to the root of the cause. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the cause isn't ADHD. There's something underlying that, and you've said that many times about different things. You have to get to the root of the cause. And it's like, medical doctors are not trained for that. Right.
They're taking a symptom focus, and they just want to get rid of the symptom.
Yeah.
And so if I was to run down and I'm prepared with, in a sense, okay, what do we need to do to manage things when you're having attention problems, when you're inattentive, when you're hyperactive, when you're impulsive. Those, to me, also could be looked at instead of like, okay, this defines ADHD, that these are challenges that are commonly present in people. They're frequent, that we fall into these categories. So with parents, I mean, when you start to do this, with ADHD, you want a structured routine.
Yeah.
You need to reinforce and train, which means what is the opposite of these behaviors? And like when you're training somebody, you got to realize, like, we're not talking like this is going to be done in a week. If this is identified in 3rd grade, you're talking about getting somewhere by the time you're in 12th grade sometimes.
Yeah.
And so the stories that you tell in emerging, I could say, like, just for a plethora of reasons in school, I just wasn't really the best student in grade school.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what I was pulling. People would say I was intelligent, but, whatever. And it took me probably until I was in grad school to realize how I could apply myself.
Yeah.
And the fact was that I was not allowed to give up by the people who were around me. They were training me, and I had great training and, with teachers, people who put up with me, people who didn't try to throw me in jail for me being, and that all came from my family members who, there were mean people who didn't put any trust in me, who probably would just think I was delinquent.
Yeah. And
I was protected. And that was part of the trainers. Like they saw something in me.
Yeah.
I feel very badly for kids who don't have that.
Yeah.
Because it could be over by the time you get through high school. But again, if you would have looked at me in mid high school and said, I'm going to be running an organization. And I'm going to be producing things, people would have not agreed with that at all. It just wasn't there. Yeah. And I wasn't really good, but I bet you, in my graduating class, And, I was probably like in the middle of my graduating class, and I'm outperforming the top third.
Yeah, that's about where I was. I was.
This wasn't anything special.
No, I wasn't in National Honor Society or anything like that. It's just
because I was emerging. So again, like so structured routine, positive reinforcement, behavioral strategies that shape things, and making modifications in your environment. Also, with people who have trouble focusing, physical activity. What's the tough thing with physical activity? You just have to do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And so any kind of thing, really there. And then sleep and nutrition, even though the ADHD experts out there, and there's a lot of literature to say like nutrition is really not going to play a factor. I would say the counselors who are out there, if they will admit it to the public, when you put all of these things together, you are gaining in every category until you get to the place where this person who would have been called ADHD after years of training is performing at least at where everybody's at. Sometimes they're overperforming by the time you're all said and done. And plus you get these residuals that this person had to really tough it out. And now, because they had to struggle, they can face all kinds of struggles. It's a normal thing where these top performers that never had to study or never had to pay attention, they just got it. When they run into a problem, they don't know what to do. Yeah. So
I do have to say though that we moved down here about 10 years ago, but my kids went to the Butler School District, and that school district in itself, I mean, some of the teachers are really good, but the school itself, I mean, they were in an elementary school that you had to walk through locked doors, you had to go through metal detectors, then you had to your stuff had to be searched by an armed guard. I kid you not.
In Butler.
Wow. Okay, a guy with a gun. An armed guard. Most of them were retired state troopers. Okay. This is an elementary. If I would have mentioned this school 40 years ago and described it, you'd think I was talking about prison.
Yeah.
But this was Butler. And I come down, we came down to Latrobe, totally different. Kids loved it. Kids, just did exceptionally well in that school district.
So change of environment.
The change of environment did well, and I did end up meeting someone else, Sarah. You've met Sarah many times, and have two stepchildren. Emma, who actually turns 18 today. Just wonderful, and the kids just all get along.
So your family environment and what was happening there. Eventually that environment evolves and changes.
Yes.
And that made a bit, you can see wow, that did matter.
It did. It really did matter. And like we mentioned early on in the podcast, Brooke's married to a wonderful guy. She would have never met Austin unless we had moved down here. God has plans for everything. We don't understand it, and bringing God into it, because I once had a pastor tell me that, our plan in life is like a task. What's it called? A tapestry, I think it's the name, like it's stitched.
Yeah.
But we always see the back of it, where it's all messed up. We never actually see the design of it on the front.
Right. It's a whole bunch of
and that's the thing. I mean, we went through this heartache. The kids went through it. It was terrible. But, God turned all that around for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And we, this has been a highly technical talk about ADHD. Yeah. And when you bring in the aspect of how do we face adversity, how do we want to do that, there's this common thing that's happening nowadays that I'm concerned about. And that is, you have a problem, I have a label.
Yeah.
And then I have a medication to make you feel better. And you know what? You don't have to worry about a thing. And it's going to be okay. And we'll take all the adversity away. Instead of, what does God have for us in this struggle that we're going through something? And there's a purpose to all of that, that we need to pursue God about.
Yeah.
And we need to face that. It's not about me not having to struggle or being entitled to feel good.
Yeah.
And it makes me sound like I love suffering, or I want to see people suffer.
Yeah.
It's not that. It is just that there was more, and if we ignore that, we really miss. So I guess I'm not like, hey, don't take any medication. To be fair, our policy here at CCA is we just want people to have the opportunity to take the least amount of medication for the least amount of time possible, and still, be able to reach their goals in life.
Yeah.
And learn how to face things and grow in that ability. Statistically, that's the best you can do for people who are going through something.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to recommend, because just like you had said, and I hope our audience today will really listen to Gary and his experience, because it's very typical of parents that I've talked to that there are significant side effects from giving children psychostimulants. Some are going to benefit from that. You should be cautious.
Yeah.
Because there are negative side effects, and the more time you go on that, the more irreversible they become. And people form a dependence on a lot of these medications, including ones that are related to ADHD.
Yeah.
You forget how to function without it. Mm-hmm. And so there are people who take it their whole lives and develop irreversible side effects, like the ones that you described.
And that's the other thing I have to mention, is that when we took them off the medicine, we didn't stop cold. Like, we didn't
You couldn't. You can't do that kind of stuff.
We weaned them off.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like, boom. It took a couple months.
And let's be clear, I'm not judging, we're not judging any parent for making a choice for medication, because that's one of the criticisms that maybe this will arise out of this testimonial. We're just being and coaching people to be cautious.
Yeah, I'm just saying that was my own personal story, that everybody's story is different.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I would say, like as you had said that, like, hey, sometimes, like, I feel like I have ADHD too.
Yes.
And so, we have, there are advances that have been made. Like, first, if you're going to really come to a conclusion about that, you should go through some kind of behavioral survey where you're going across environments and getting different viewpoints from people. And so we have a way of doing that here at CCA. But then we also have a measurement that's norm referenced, which means if you're going to say that you have trouble with attention, we're going to say, well, how bad is that? We can measure it and compare it with everybody else.
Yeah.
And there's a valid way to do that. And so what we use it's called a MOXO test, MOXO. And, this is a computerized performance-based assessment designed to help diagnose ADHD in children and adults.
Yeah.
It's different from rating scales like the BASK that we just talked about, because it measures real-time attention and impulse control through direct observation of task performance. So it's really great.
Yeah, it was an interesting test.
And you took it.
Yeah.
And that's where we're not going to sort of eye it up and say, because I might, it's unfortunate that docs, they have a lot of people coming in and it depends on what kind of description you're giving. That the dog might be like, man, that's really bad, and they're just creating a scenario that has a high probability of error.
Yeah.
So when you're building a house, you want it to be right on. If you're building a way to face these types of problems, you want it to be right on.
Yeah.
And so you want to measure this test to find out exactly how bad it is. And so that's what we did.
Well, how
And,
will I do?
and you can do that. And that's what we do at CCA. Like, we're not going to sort of guesstimate it. We're going to tell you exactly, and we're going to go through a lot of that kind of stuff. We're going to be cautious. That's when people get the best results. And that's what I'd encourage our audience, to think about. And if I would just tell you, there's a lot of clinicians out there probably listening to be like, wow, I wish we were doing that here too. It's not being done in a lot of places.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we really insist on accuracy in assessment, using measurements to validate that. And I think it's really like a valuable thing for the folks. So let's take a look, at what your results were, and this would be the way, I would go through it with anybody here, just to, and I'm going to pull up your results. And folks, we're just going to describe this in general today. I'm not putting Gary's whole life out here, but you did ask me about it, and
yeah.
So this produces an overview, and it measures attentiveness, the ability to respond correctly and remain focused. It measures timeliness,
Okay.
which is the ability to respond quickly and accurately.
Yeah.
And it measures impulsiveness, which is the tendency to respond hasty before evaluating the situation, like rushing.
Oh, yeah.
That make a mistake.
Yeah.
And then hyperreactivity, which is a difficulty in regulation of motor responses. So that would be like the hyperactivity.
Yeah.
So those are the 4 areas that this measures. And it's a scenario where you have to, it flashes. Do you want to describe what the test was like for the folks?
Because I took this probably, a couple months ago. It's just different objects that come up on the screen, and then there's sound. And when the sound came on, and that's not right up front in the test.
Doesn't tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely was more of a distraction.
Yeah.
To me more than the pictures that came up.
Gives you all kinds of weird pictures and sounds while it's
Yeah.
asking you to do something. So
Yeah, it asks you to do something on the screen, and then you have these a police car or something like that with flashing lights that come up on the screen, and then later on the siren of it is introduced, and just trying to fuzzy up your brain a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. So it produces distractions in real world scenarios, visually and auditorially, and it then measures that through your responses, and it compares you to a database of people on different severity levels, and so it can place you accurately at some severity level. And then from there, we could just say, we can answer the question, how bad is it? What are we really facing here? Because the way we feel about some challenge is very subjective.
Yeah. Some
Some people say, it's nothing. And other people are like, it's horrible.
Yeah.
And maybe the reality is somewhere in between.
Yeah.
So that's what this test carves out. And it's been given to hundreds of thousands of people. It's been in time, development. It's, again, MOXO, MOXO. And it was, it's been in development, and we use this here. Again, measuring attentiveness, timeliness, impulsiveness, and hyperreactivity. So, and then it ranges that you have good performance, standard, weak, or difficulty in performance. Mm-hmm. So your attentiveness was in the difficulty category, and that was your lowest rating. it had a medium severity in that category.
Okay.
Okay. So that it rates from low severity to extreme severity.
Okay.
And that was your difficulty area. Now, the timeliness was a weak performance, but it's in the normal range.
Okay.
And then impulsiveness was standard, normal, and hyperactivity was actually, you're performing very well there.
Okay.
So it sort of shows you this range that all of these things that we could call ADHD, it's broken apart into these 4 categories. And if we were going to say that you would struggle in an area, it would be in the ability to respond correctly and remain focused.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting too is that it gives you these distractors, and so with with your attention, when there's visual distractors, it affects you, but in other categories it doesn't.
Okay.
So I mean, you have to be careful with these tests because this is a snapshot in time, and maybe we would test and retest. We have the ability to do that, of course, but in this snapshot, we start to investigate the problem of visual stimuli. Like, so if there's somebody like walking behind me and I'm saying, hey, I'm going to tell you something really important. And you're like, and and something I know from Gary is like, when we're in meetings, he's saying, hey, can you write that down?
Yeah.
You write that down for me, because, I imagine you're going to go back to a place later and take a look at that, and you're going to really focus on it with a place of low distraction.
Yeah.
And you're going to take as much as you can out of that meeting, but that is a way that you mediate that.
Yeah.
Some people might be in that meeting, they don't need it. I remember it, and
Well, it's like remembering people's names.
right.
A lot of times I'll write the name down so I can remember it.
Right.
Because it's like, I think a lot of people have trouble remembering people's names when they first meet them. Some people have you repeat it, or they'll repeat it back to you. Kind of the same thing.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting in this is that it measures your ability to sustain performance, and under these conditions, really, again, just when there's visual stimuli, your sustained performance is going to drop in that category of attentiveness. Timeliness, actually, when you have auditory stimuli or it's combined, which means there's visual and auditory stimuli, you're actually increasing your timeliness.
Oh, really?
So there's something stimulating in you there. And the way that we would read this is that you might try to gravitate towards this kind of stimulation, even though it causes distraction. It helps you move more quickly.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like good and bad.
So if you want me to get a job done real quick, you going to play music or something?
Right. And you might want something going off in the background, or on another screen. It might be like moving you along, like keeping you at high pace, keeping you interested. Okay. And so, that was really, and because inattentiveness and hyperactivity are not an issue, there was rises and drops in that performance that we can begin to take a look at. But it really doesn't matter because there's nothing really there for us. You're doing well.
Yeah.
And so that would be a brief way. And what's really great about this test is it goes into a whole bunch of other details that we can start to drill down and construct a plan. Now, if you remember before in the, when we were talking about all those things that we need to have, remember, like, this is just like a standard, thing, but the environment, I want to go back to my notes here. But structured routine, positive reinforcement, behavioral strategies, environmental modifications, physical activity, sleep, and nutrition. And that's one of the, those are all factors that if you take care of those and you have the right information to say, okay, this is what I'm facing, I know exactly what we're trying to do here, you really have a high probability of facing this effectively. And, for you, what I know is like, this isn't, at this stage of the game, you're good at facing this if this was a problem at some time. And also, what naturally happened with the kids was whatever they were having trouble with, whatever the challenge that they were going through, that was resolved pretty quickly. And the moral of the story for me is that we should give people a chance to get good at doing that kind of stuff, because life is full of challenges and problems. And if we lose our ability to face those things, it can get pretty bad.
Yeah.
Because we might have a medication for this, but we don't have it for the other 10 things, or we could become over-reliant, or we could get on it long-term forever.
Well, for me, it was just, losing my first wife. I mean, it affected me. I was mad for the longest time. It affected my second marriage.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for counseling, it helped me out a lot.
Right. So somebody, if they were just giving you a pressure, say, hey, you should just feel better about this, and we got to wait for it to happen.
Yeah.
How that would have short-circuited, something that you really, it took some time, a long time to deal with that. And truth be told, because I know you, it's just something that we deal with to this day.
Yeah.
And that's part of life.
Yeah.
And
you have to be able to grieve, and you have to be able to,
like the people in our church says, everybody's going through something.
Yeah. And the thing that I look back now is like, and for me, and I'm sorry, but I know that this is your business, but, I always felt if you go to counseling, there's something wrong with me, but that's not the case at all, and for me, counseling was just, it was wonderful.
Yeah, you had some breakthroughs in counseling. The counseling wasn't here, so we're not pushing up CCA by saying that.
No, I went to a Christian counseling person,
and it really helped.
But it was a private practice.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it was before I really knew you.
Before you knew us, you'd come here a few today.
Yeah, I would have. But no, really.
Thanks, Gary.
Yeah. But no, I went with, who recommended me to somebody, a family member.
Yeah.
And it really did help a lot. I mean, it completely.
And today, you're the greatest website photographer, graphic design guy I ever saw.
Yeah. Okay.
So
I'm the only one. Yeah.
Plus, podcast engineer and and a great friend.
Yeah.
So Gary, I really appreciate you. I appreciate the story that you're telling the folks today. I hope that we can take something out of this, for all those who face any challenge, but specifically those who are figuring out what to do with a challenge that's being called ADHD. And so, Gary, to end today, I would just say, hey, could you say a prayer for the folks, for just people who are going through something like this?
Yeah.
Maybe we could end that way today.
Yeah, sure. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for being in my life, and thank you for all the good that you've done for myself and my family. Please, look at those parents who might be going through similar situations, or they have children that are having difficulties, whether it be in school or socially. Just allow them to make informed decisions. Allow those parents to just be able to, ask for your guidance in going forward and being able to get the correct help that's needed for their children. And we just ask that you be with them. And we ask that those parents, if they're listening to this podcast, that this podcast will be a beacon of hope for them, to be able to weigh their decision-making, Lord. And we ask that you be with them. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thanks for listening, folks. We'll see you next time.